Are you ready to level up your life? Welcome to Zero to Hero, the podcast where we learn from the games we love and cherish to level up in real life. I'm your quest guy, James, here to help you earn real world experience points, overcome life's challenges, and build your ultimate character beyond the screen. Each episode will uncover lessons learned from RPGs, MMOs, and open world adventures, and apply these directly to your personal growth, business, and mindset. The journey from Zero to Hero begins now. Starting a new character. In this chapter, I kind of want to talk about starting a new character in games that we're already familiar in. An example of this would be Skyrim. Whether you're a mage, swordsman, kind of like a really cool like orc or something, and in my case, a stealth archer, it changes the game like dramatically. So, we all know that depending on the type of character is going to affect the type of items we're looking for, types of quests we're going to start. Some quests even negatively affect our character. So the character we pick at the start of the game actually changes almost the whole thing, except for kind of the core storyline. And I mean, a good example of that in our real life is, we all have bills to pay. We all have obviously like a limited amount of time on this planet. We all have health to worry about, family, friends. We all have very similar things. That's kind of like the core gameplay, I guess, kind of the core quest that we have to follow to some extent. But I mean, the character that we pick or choose, whether by complete choice or not, makes a big difference to how it plays out. And I kind of want to kind of expand on the idea of starting a new character in a familiar game. And the game is obviously our life. We can't change everything. We can't move countries, at the drop of a hat, but we can kind of make a new character within the game. So for example, we could ask questions kind of like, what do we want to be? What type of character do we want to be? Do we want to be that stealth archer that hides from far away? Do we want to kind of be that, confronting strong, swordsman or something? And then what would that look like in real life? Would that swordsman be someone who's kind of outgoing and has a bit of a more of a social life, for example? Or are we like the stealthy mage who kind of hides in the shadows and kind of plays our cards kind of mysteriously and, builds relationships, but in a different way, maybe we're not kind of out there, kind of like the swordsman. And, we can kind of mix it up with things like this. We can kind of choose our class more than we probably think we can, even though our circumstances can't change, the game can't change, but the character can kind of, represent something totally different every time. And I don't think it's too late to kind of start a new character. I think even maybe even our 20s and 30s and 40s. I mean, there's no real limit on when we could start a new character, and it could kind of have a lot of benefits to it, such as, making life much more exciting again, kind of bringing a new energy into the journey, and often, create new perspectives and opportunities that we didn't think was possible. So that's definitely something we could explore into. A few obvious places we could start to kind of change our character would be our career or our role. So for example, we could always change jobs, whether that's overnight or slowly. We could slowly, apply for jobs and, do some training after hours to, such as university or TAFE, depending on the country you're in. And that can kind of give us a new perspective on life and kind of keep things interesting, but also give us a hope that things can change. Sometimes we feel like we're stuck in a job, but, doing a bit of extra training on the side can really kind of give us either opportunities within the current role, or, for example, starting a new role, which is really great. In terms of more fun things, we could always learn a new skill. So we might not enjoy our job, for example, and there might not be a easy way out of that, but we could always learn a new hobby or a discipline, such as martial arts or learning how to make furniture or, kind of something fun, even just a more relaxing hobby like starting a new game or, maybe even a type of game that we never thought we'd enjoy, such as like a puzzle game. I haven't really explored into those, and maybe that would change my whole perspective on games and how they work. We could also, change our philosophy. We could read a book on perhaps a religion or a way of thinking that perhaps we were kind of opposed to before. And by reading that, we might actually be able to either add to our current beliefs and mentality or, completely change it altogether and totally open up a whole nother realm of possibilities. And even though, as we said before, we are kind of still in the same game, we're still on planet Earth, we still have probably similar friends and family, we probably can't escape those all in, a matter of moments. But imagine if those situations, for example, if you had a difficult family upbringing, became slightly more tolerable. Or perhaps your difficult boss at your work became slightly easier to manage and understand. Maybe the new martial arts skill gave you the confidence to go out and do activities that you never thought you could do. So, starting this new character isn't really starting a new life, but it is going to change the game, and that's what this is all about, is just growing and developing and kind of giving a new perspective. So I really do want you to think about the amount of things you could kind of change in your character, and it doesn't have to be all at once. It could be, again, a skill. You could add some points to a particular skill in a game, just like you could in real life, and it can kind of affect the rest of the gameplay. You might not be able to change the past, but you could definitely affect the future game, make it more exciting, make it more fun again. And maybe you actually want to jump on and play. You don't actually just, going through the motions because you've got nothing better to do. You actually might really enjoy it and really want to develop your life into something more interesting and realize how much control you probably have over that character and what that character says and does, even though, the game itself hasn't changed necessarily. So please do think about that. And, it can actually kind of expand into even more areas. And some of these areas can actually be kind of more to do with the self-reflection. I won't be able to answer these for you, but for example, if you sat down and ask yourself, what are my current characteristics? For example, my strengths and weaknesses, just in a game where you'd have, let's say, a mage who's weak against sword fighting, but great against, archers, for example. But, maybe that's not a good example, but, something like that, you could just have a look at your own character and kind of say, if I was to write down all my stats, so to speak, what type of character would I be? Am I a good character? Am I the hero? Am I the villain? And then kind of sit down and reflect on where do you actually want that to go? Because some people, even though from the outside maybe look like they need a lot of help, are actually pretty happy with kind of how their character plays out and kind of their game. But, this channel in particular is all about personal development. And obviously you can be happy where you are, but you can also want to grow and expand and learn new things. So that's a great thing to do, is just obviously sit down and reflect on our strengths and weaknesses, write them down. That's what I personally do once every probably quarter or maybe even half a year. I write down kind of what I call the wheel of life, which is, kind of like wealth, health, and, friendship, love, all the major areas of life. And I give it kind of like a ranking. For example, maybe I've done a lot of new hobbies, so I can give myself like an 8 on in terms of like entertainment, or a 10 out of relationship if my relationships are going really well at the time. And then I can kind of sit back and say, okay, is this the kind of direction I want to go into? What's some areas I want to kind of improve on, and where do I want to expand? And also areas that I maybe want to even subtract a little bit. Maybe I've had too much fun and I kind of got to get back into kind of a hustle mind, and kind of, aim on, improving my finances and my education. And that's okay as well. So it just depends where we're at in the game and kind of, where we want to be. So part of that reflection is, once we've sat down and we've kind of listed our strengths and weaknesses, we can again take on some new challenges. Again, it doesn't have to just be hobbies or careers. It can also just be little micro challenges, and exploring, new roles. As again, it could be a stay-at-home father, or it could be a new mother. So some of those are kind of new chapters in the game, I suppose, that we could unlock within that character. And we can, some of those are not chosen necessarily, but we can definitely influence them. Maybe we want to kind of change our current, stage that we're in. Maybe have the single fun life. Now we want to kind of settle down and meet somebody. We've got to ask ourselves, what would that character kind of do? What type of person would that be? And again, we can change that character, which is ourselves, just as we could in a game. And that comes from, a lot of just small steps that we could take. And all of this is pretty much small steps. I'm not expecting anybody to change 30 or 40, elements of their life. That's not the point of this. The point of this is to take on something small, see how it affects the game, reiterate, sit down, self-reflect, go back to that strengths and weaknesses, and then kind of continue from there. Some things that we could probably, small steps that we could improve on, again, is probably even just taking the time to self-reflect is probably something that a lot of people could probably do. It's something I try to do quite often, and I encourage everyone to do it, because it can actually either reinforce already what we're happy with, or it can really show some areas that we need to change, and that's pretty cool. Taking some small steps, for example, is even just subtle changes in our language. So, maybe use extreme words such as, you have to do this or you must do this. And we could just change that to, I think you could do this, or you may choose to do this, or if you're happy to do this. And that character, even though it's such a minor change over time, people could see that as a more reassuring and friendly and open-minded person rather than someone who's demanding and a bit more aggressive on that front. And again, that's only if that is something that you wanted to change and maybe something that you've, discovered during your self-reflection time. And you can imagine even in a game like such games like Mass Effect, for example, where you've got the good, you've kind of got the neutral, you've got the negative, and it turns out, depending on which one you pick, even from the very start of the game, over time, those small little decisions that we decide in that game actually affect the end of the game without us even knowing. And I mean, in real life, it's the exact same. What you say to someone at work, perhaps you didn't even realize on your first day, actually influences how they view you for your entire career with them. Or it might be something that you said to a friend 10 years ago that you don't even realize, and you may not even know the effects of that. It's kind of scary in a way that, what we do can affect us so further into the future that we're not even aware. But the cool part is we're in control of that, and we can kind of decide, from today, I'm going to start being nicer to people. I'm going to start being more authentic. I'm going to be a shoulder to cry on. It depends, again, what type of character you want to be. But it's kind of nice to know that, you can start this immediately. And those effects, well, yeah, they'll probably start affecting you now, but also just like before when we weren't aware of these, they'll also affect you 10 years from now when maybe that person you let cry on your shoulder comes back with a great business opportunity and you can work together, which is really cool. So just kind of a final boss tip, there's some questions we could ask ourselves with this. What aspects of my life feel repetitive and uninspired right now? And what kind of small steps could we take to kind of improve on those? What new character could I create and re-energize this journey? Is it a cool businessman? Is it a loving, caring, stay-at-home partner? Who am I? And what kind of new character do I want to build? And also, how can I embrace this change and approach it with curiosity and enthusiasm? This doesn't have to be doom and gloom. Guess what? This is all optional. You don't have to become a different person. You don't have to work on personal development. There's none of this. It's all optional. Just like in a game, you can play the same game over and over and over again, but you don't have to. And that's what the beauty is. Even if you might be stuck kind of with the same overall arching story, we can choose to make it interesting, fun, serious, scary, horrible. We can make it fantastic. And I'm hoping you choose to make it fantastic. So yeah, I just want to kind of finish up with, starting a new character again, like in Skyrim, it might seem scary, horrible. Maybe we feel like we're wasting our experience and journey that we've kind of built so far, but it can also be fun. And I hope you can take this and realize that, we can keep our life dynamic and interesting, and it's not so bad. We can start a new character starting today with little things. And I just want to leave you with that and realize that this is all part of the journey from going from zero. And that zero is not bad. That zero is where you are starting your journey. And become a hero, which is what I want you to all be. A hero for yourself and for those around you. Not comparing to other people, but comparing to the zero that you began at. And that's it. I hope I see you next time in the next podcast. And we're going to cover many, many topics. See you around.